because it was an unsolvable problem. The program would not fit inside of the volume that we gave them. And we were watching to see how they would react to that. We knew that at some point they would all get to the same conclusion that this program won't fit in this volume. So what we were curious about is where were they going to violate either the program by cutting it or the volume by going beyond it. And how they handled it was important to us because we wanted to know whether they were going to try to drive the project or they were actually listening to what the client needed to get done in 26 months. So the Diamond Smith Group.
Welcome to another fantastic episode of Nakoto Building Arts. I'm your host, Nakoto, and today I'd like to welcome another awesome guest, Ron Austin. Ron is the Managing Director of VVA, Project and Cost Managers. With over 30 years of professional experience, Ron has established a trusted reputation as one of the foremost authorities in the planning, development, and delivery of cultural performance venues and convening spaces. He has successfully completed projects across the U.S., Canada, Middle East, and Asia. As Managing Director for VVA's Cultural Convening and Performing Arts Venue Development Sector, Ron combines his focused professional experience with VVA's national project and cost management presence, which has allowed VVA to position itself as a leader in providing executive-level management services covering every aspect of developing cultural and convening spaces, including complex performance and visual museum venues. Some of his notable projects include the Shed at Hudson Yards in New York City. I like that building. I've seen that. Maybe we can talk a little more about that later on. It is the world's first retractable performance venue with 16,000 square feet of convertible performance space. The Adrian R. Center for the Performing Arts, a 570,000 square foot world-class performing arts center located in downtown Miami, Florida. At the time of its completion was the largest public-private partnership in Miami-Dade County with a final budget of $480 million. Obviously, that's pre-COVID and the inflation bump, and probably a billion now. And the redevelopment of the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City, valued at $1.2 billion. The overall scale of the effort consisted of 37 individual yet simultaneous projects, which required the services of 5 world-renowned architectural firms, 4 construction managers, and hundreds of sub-consultants and subcontractors. Completed in 2012, the project was credited with not having a performance impacted or canceled due to the reconstruction efforts. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the Building Arts Podcast, Ron Austin. How are you, Ron?
Well, thanks, Dakota. I'm very well, thank you. And isn't it amazing what chatbot can actually do when you ask it to write an introduction? I couldn't have written it better myself.
Yeah, I got you. I need to use that more often.
I don't know if any of it's true, but it sounded good.
Oh man, so it's great to have you on. You know, you've been in this business, in this whole industry, the theater world, performing arts world, for such a long time, 30 plus years, like your bio says. I've been in construction for 25, 26 years, but only the last 15 to 16 years has been dedicated to performing arts and other cultural arts buildings focus. So I remember starting the business and working for other company, DCI, and being around and hearing the name Ron Austin, you know, you hear on different projects, all positive, obviously. And so being on one of the calls there was a meeting going on, and then finally I heard the voice, Ron Austin, the name that I've been hearing all the time, you know. And so finally had a chance to be on the call with you. Wasn't in conversation with you, but be on the call with you. And you're such a highly well-respected person in the industry. And finally, maybe a year or two ago on the Panama project, which you're managing and running, had an opportunity to finally meet you face to face. So it is such a pleasure in this business. Sometimes I hear a lot of names, and you know, when I started out in it, and to finally meet some of the people that I used to hear about all the time and hear stories about fun, you know. So it's great to have you on the show with me today.
Well, thank you. I tell you what, it has been a journey and a half, and it's hard to believe that it's been that many years. Like
Yeah.
you, I grew up. Well, my situation is probably a little different. I grew up in a construction family, and
Okay.
I had moved around. My father was the oldest of his family and had, I think there were 11 in total, and chased power plant work around the country and steel mills. So I have lived in many exciting locales, including Bismarck, North Dakota, um, Ashland, Kentucky, Beaumont, Texas, places like that. So you get to see a different side of the country when you're,
Mhm.
you know, like the military, chasing around on military bases and whatnot. But in what year was it? It's hard to remember these now. Back in the 80s, I was
Yeah.
I was co-oping with a firm out of Cincinnati, family-owned construction company,
Okay.
and was assigned to a project. It was about an 18,000 seat open air amphitheater project on the banks of the Ohio River. And it was interesting in that the project was built to tolerate a flood of about 3 or 4 feet every year, which uh, it experienced it every
Mhm.
year. It just kind of flooded there. But you know, construction's construction. But what was different about it is Michael Gray's, before his affliction kind of altered his career a bit. But you had the acoustician, the theater designer, and the architect.
Mhm.
Then you also had the structural engineers and the HVAC engineers, who are often overshadowed by the architects when it comes to these projects, but they're certainly the heroes because there's always a space consideration. There's always this tension inside of the design team when it comes to trying to shape the building acoustically and also squeeze all of that required infrastructure into place. And it can lead to some interesting conversations. So in the early 80s, that was my first exposure to a performance venue. And I just fell in love with it. You know, there was
Mhm.
many things in my career that I had done from a construction perspective, but a couple of things about it. You'll hear this over and over on our types of projects, cultural projects. You're
Mhm.
building the violin, not the violin factory. Uh, it's okay when your client cries when they first experience your building. That's probably
Yeah.
not true at a call center or a office building, but once you know the area comes out and
Mhm.
tears roll, everybody is very happy. That is the celebration that we all live for. So it is there are many people that I've experienced in my career that are in this business that got hooked early in on their journey through their work cycles, and they just never could get out. You mentioned DCI. You know, Stuart Donnell was the godfather when it came to pricing up construction projects, uh, theater projects, Fisher Dax,
Yeah.
those acoustics, Mark Holden, all of these titans of the industry that are, you know, now my age or older, are passing it on, passing the torch down to the next generations. So I'm just thrilled that I've had the opportunity to participate in some of these projects with some of these key players. It was hell of a ride.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, definitely so. And you've had opportunity, like your bio says, to work all over the world on these fantastic buildings. I can imagine even as a cost consultant, a lot of times I don't get an opportunity to go to the projects because we're on the front end of it. So we'll do all the front end pre-construction work, but then we'll move on to the next project. So we don't go through the construction and the commissioning and opening of the building. So that's an awesome place that you're in. You're at the beginning and you see it all the way through to completion. So you take me back. First of all, your how would you describe? I've interviewed acusticians, theater planners, architects. How would you describe your role in this process? Is it a developer? Do you say a developer or a planner or what?
No, yes, but no. I've worn many hats, and it just depends upon the project.
Okay.
For example, Miami. It unfortunately it seems that I get these calls when all these projects, cultural projects, get in a bind. Miami called. They were 600 days behind schedule and $150 million into asserted claims, and
Wow.
there was nothing really happening. I had a relationship with Caesar Pelli, the architects. Miami-Dade County was the client. They had visited a project that I had been working with the team out of Cincinnati, and that project was very successful for the time. We had set the schedule 5 years before we stuck a shovel, or at the beginning, 2 years before the shovel went in the ground, we set the schedule. And then 5 years later, we hit the date. Well, we were actually ahead by about a week. The State of Ohio project, it was impossible to bring more funding into the job. So we had a guaranteed max, and we were fortunate enough to stay under it. So Pelli was one of the voices that said, we need to bring in an outsider that has no relationship with politics, doesn't know the parties, or doesn't know the problems that the party are suffering. Let's get a third party objective opinion and see what we can do. The contractor, the CM at that time, was a tri-venture, Elliston out of Toronto, Haskell out of Jacksonville, and Odebrecht out of Miami, Florida. So when they called, I was kind of in the middle of all of that, trying to figure out what was causing the problem and then how to work out a solution. So it's hard to describe what that role actually was. It's not the development role. It's not. So it was a referee, a mediator, a priest, whatever you want to say.
A fixer? Are you a fixer?
A fixer. A fixer.
Yeah.
So that's one side of the position. The other in Lincoln Center, for example, there it was just purely the owner. So we hired, the accountants, we hired the attorneys, we hired the engineers, the architects. Basically, they just gave you a big pot of money, and then you were responsible. You had oversight, trust me.
Yeah.
Report back to the board and the executives, but it was a different type of role and position. So I would say, these projects are so large, and most of the time cultural projects are considered tertiary in the needs of municipalities, but they require a subsidy into perpetuity. So there's got to be some taxing authority or deep pockets that are available to make sure that there's enough, not just for the capital development, but also for the operations. There needs to be some type of pot that's available to help these things grow, and the money the endowment needs to grow with it so that they can continue to provide the services. People will say it's like a library, but it's not. The world of culture and the documented benefits of culture on the youth and the educational advancements that they'll experiencing culture early on in their lives. El Sistema in South America is a perfect example of that. Dudamel, he pushes that, and it's it's real. If you go there and you see every student plays an instrument, and they don't do it because it's required. Well, it is required, but they do it because they want to. And there's a love and appreciation that we seem to be, this North America seems to be on the downward side of it instead of the upward swing like we were, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. They're experiencing, and it's just so vibrant and refreshing to see that. I would say that because of that, these large municipalities that get together to build these things, there's an ad hoc committee of some sort, of building committee that has politicians. It'll have a lot of lawyers, doctors, important members of society, but they've really never experienced this type of building the violin, not the violin factory. They may have done something else that was important for the community, a library, or you name it. But an art center is different. The acoustical applications, if you're off even slightly, you mentioned Lincoln Center, Alice Tully Hall. I'm sorry, not Alice Tully, Avery Fisher Hall, or Philharmonic Hall as originally it was known. Leo Baranek, when he designed the acoustics for that building, was surprised to learn that his design was not embraced so much by the architects, so much so that they cut about 40 rows out of it and made the building shorter and forever damned the acoustics. And that was one of the reasons why, they just had to spend $500 to $600 million in correcting that. It's an expensive endeavor if you don't get it right the first time. So they will look to somebody that has experience in doing it, familiar, proven track record. And so that's kind of the role that I didn't set out to do it. It just happened to find me, and I enjoy it so much. I go to shows, I listen to all of the productions that are out, I see whatever I can see wherever I'm at. And the best way I would couch it is saying is that I'm a person that's familiar with the exercise and can wear the hat of the owner all the way down through any of the other roles. So I've worked for contractors to help them when they don't have a lot of experience on projects. I've worked helping architects understand what they're getting into. I've helped the owners on their side of it. I've helped the counties, the communities, the municipalities. So if there's a role that needs to be filled, I'm perfectly comfortable in filling any of those. There's never a dull day when you're working on a cultural project.
I guess with so many, like you just mentioned, there's so many different parts and pieces to make one of these one-off buildings become a reality, from vision to reality. They need someone like you to be that glue to keep everybody in line. So I guess sort of like in a maestro of an orchestra, all the different pieces to make everything flow in in the proper form.
But you only get one rehearsal.
Yeah, and then the show, huh?
Then the show starts. Right. You don't get to do it over and over. That's interesting though, because in Cincinnati, we were talking about Pele. They were the architects on the Aronoff Center. It's a 2,600 seat Broadway Roadhouse facility, excellent facility, beautiful job. And typically these types of projects are geographically isolated because you can't build them too close, or you'll pull each other's audience, and more importantly, you're fundraisers. The philanthropist, will have to make a decision between one city or the other if they're too close. But right after the Aronoff completed in Cincinnati, about a year or two later, they decided to build one about 30 miles north in Dayton. So they did a smart thing, but it was an interesting exercise, and I wished I'd had more time to actually do some more documentation on this. But they used the same architect, the same contractor, the same engineers, the exact same team that worked on one project, went 30 miles, subcontractors, everyone went 30 miles up the road and did another one. And the results were similar but different, as you can imagine, because the one in Dayton, even though it's about the same size, it has a 20-plus story residential tower that's part of the development, and also has a big winter garden. But it's an interesting analogy. Had we had the time to document it, the pros and cons of that, because people always say it's a one-off, and it is, because you're
Right.
again, you're geographically isolated, and everybody has a different opinion about what they want and what they need for a
Mm.
particular locale. The heating loads in Miami are certainly different than the heating and cooling loads are going to be in New York. So even something like that can affect the size of the duct that's going into the building, which can ultimately, affect many other things on down the trail of dominoes that are going to fall. So yes, it is they are very much bespoke. They are
Yeah.
not off the rack. They are, and I had mentioned that on these ad hoc committees, you have a doctor, you have a lawyer, you have others, and then you'll have a developer, and the developer will bring a different approach to a project or an understanding about what it takes to design and deliver a construction project. In their world, 7 years, the gestation
Mhm.
for
Right.
an art center is about 7 years. And then you'll have roughly 2.5 years of design and 3.5 years of construction, depending upon the size and again the complexity. And that's just unheard of in the world of development. You just
Mhm.
can't live in a private market like that. Now, maybe the Sphere out in Vegas had a,
Oh man,
but that's
that
yet to
is.
be seen. It is a spectacle, no doubt. But
It definitely makes me want to go out to Vegas to see it. I saw the pictures of it, the video of it today. I was like, wow, I would like to, they would like to see that one.
well, then go
Uh,
out, you go see that, and then stop by the Smith Center and see Paul Beard and his group out there, which has done a fantastic job with that center, not being on the strip and presenting, typical Western classical presentations along with Broadway. Fantastic facility. So I recommend that you do.
that's one of the projects I did get the opportunity to work on. So I've seen it on the plans and doing
Perfect.
takeoffs, but the fruition of it, I would definitely love to go see that, the final product. Yeah, the one-off, you mentioned that, and a lot of times we hear people ask, how much per seat would this building cost? And I'm like, I can't tell you how much this building costs based off of the seat count because there are so many different parts. The site could be different, the architecture, the quality level is a lot of variables that go along into it. So even when we do comparable projects, it's not always comparable because there are some differences that may not just be easily seen by a cost per square foot. So
Right.
yeah, they are one-off buildings. And you mentioned some of the projects that you worked on, and kind of wanted to glean from you on what your experience of being a part of so many projects and wearing so many hats. um, the key, I'm sure you've seen some successful projects and some not so successful projects. What are some of the key, just a couple of elements that make for a successful building project for one of these projects?
Well, again, they're all different. So if there were uh, some underlying tenants that are associated with all of them, uh, it's like talking to people that are parents or couples that decide that they want to become parents, and you don't know how it's going to turn out. Sometimes it turns out very well, and sometimes not so well. But it it it's always going to have a lot of joy and a lot of stress associated with it. So uh, there are some fundamental rules that I live by. One is, and people will tell you this, that there is no good and there is no bad news. There's just news. And we have to bring that forward. Our job is to, whatever role we're wearing or what hat we're wearing, the role we're taking, we have to be very truthful because, again, you're gonna run into things that haven't ever happened before in your experience. It's just the nature of the beast. The ducts are so big, we're moving air at 500 feet per minute, not 5,000 feet per minute, like a high rise is or something, because we've got to have the air very slow. Can't be making noise, competing with the orchestra. The volume of the rooms are huge. Again, we talked about the shaping, the density, the materials, keeping the sound where it needs to be and out of where it needs to be. The vibration isolation, all of those factors that make these things challenging are going to vary. So you can't put your head in the ground and expect it to, work itself out. You've got to, there's no good, no bad. It's just news. The second thing is, I have found, I tried to make everyone, it was interesting. The first couple of projects I took on, I tried to make everyone happy, and I learned that that was a recipe for failure. So my mantra now is I make everyone equally unhappy. And it seems if you can do that, it's like having a family of 10. If everyone is equally unhappy, then the job is going to be successful, because no one can, you don't play favors to any one group. And I think people actually respect that they're being treated, everyone's being treated the same. Everyone is responsible to carry their own weight. And if you're not, then, we frankly will not go around you, but we'll help you. We'll help you. Help us. And the third thing is, on projects like this, the owners have got to be part of the solution. So much time can be lost because of these ad hoc groups. They're not professionals. They don't do this on a regular basis. The process moves at such a speed. Once the design is finished and you're going into the production of the materials and the procurement and the installation, information has to be, decisions have to be made instantaneously. You just can't stop. In New York, for example, the cost per man per day is on average about $1,000. 700 guys on site is, it's quite a burden every day that you're carrying. And not to have an answer while the job is held up is it's a recipe for disaster. So you've got to have a very involved owner, and to help them be very involved, you have to have a very robust communication program. Everyone, there is no siloing when it comes to the developing, planning, and the delivery of a performing arts center. Look, I was blessed in my career. One of the first projects of this size and scale was the Cincinnati project. And the client, a fellow by the name of Paul Goggin, who was a remarkable leader, we were CMs given the project the same day, or awarded, not given, but we were awarded the project the same day as Pele and the architects. And basically, they took us in a room and we sat down, and he said, Caesar Pele was there, and Fred Clark was there, and Mitch Hirsch, who's probably designed more theater buildings than any other architect right now. And we were sitting there, and he said, I'd like to introduce you to the company I was working with was Messer. Messer, here's Pele. Pele, here's Messer. You two need to get together. You're going to have great fun on this project. In front of you is a contract that you're going to need to sign. I'll go get a cup of coffee if you guys want to talk this through, but in the end, you're going to sign that contract because you have a bid bond in place, or whatever instrument we had to secure it. And you can't change anything. It's impossible for me to bring any more money into it. And Mr. Architect, from my perspective, having built the prisons in Ohio, most of the prisons, and managed them, you can affect the cost of the project, as you were asking about the cost per seat. You go in and make gold laboratories, it's going to drive the price up. So if we run over on the cost, you can pay for that. And Mr. Construction Manager, you're the one that has the relationship with all the trades, and you are the big dog in this city. So it seems to me you should be able to manage the schedule. So if you run long on it, you can pay for everybody else's cost. And I'll go get a coffee and let you guys talk. And then he stepped out of the room. We kind of looked at each other. So for 2 years during the design process, every 4th week, I would fly to New Haven and meet with the team. And we would talk about that. Really excited the architects in a way that probably on a typical project, they weren't that interested in the cost up front, because things are going to change as we went on. But we would have conversations while everyone was in the room about, could we move this balcony front 3 inches forward? And then they would look and say, well, why would you ask that question? Well, if you could do that, we could stack the scaffolding in such a way that we could accomplish 7 tasks in one pass instead of having to tear it down and rebuild it, which saved about $250,000. Wow. Then the pressure gets on the acoustician. Can we take and move those 3 inches forward? And of course, the answer was going to be yes, because the acoustician reported to the architect. So it was a great benefit for me to see how the process, from how the sausage was made from a world architect like Pelly. We had the luxury of having a local architect. GBBN was Gartner Burdick Bauer Nielsen was the architect of record, and they had worked with our company quite a bit, so we had this relationship. The job was phenomenal when it was finally accomplished, and I think one of the most important things to me, what happened was afterward, when the subcontractors, the actual guys on site, would come to me, the foreman, the plumbing foreman, electrician, would say, if you guys ever decide to do it, this was the job of a lifetime. If I could work on another project like this, and it wasn't that we didn't have problems and difficulties. We certainly did, but just the what the job accomplished. It was an urban renewal project. What it meant to the city of Cincinnati, the backing that we had from all of the newspapers, the general people, population. It's a fantastic project. So that was a success. That was one of the reasons why I got hooked into this. But that recipe for success was something that we wanted to replicate over and over and over again. And hopefully the people that were participating in that project were able to take it out and use some of the tools and techniques that we developed there to help them on their projects to make them as successful.
Yeah, it sounds like good leadership too on your part to be able to keep everyone flowing together. You mentioned Pelly, and I know you've had experience with other what we call star architects or signature architects, as we call. How is that relationship managed when you're leading the entire project? Is it a simple project? Is it easy to communicate with the star architect on these projects?
I need to.
Or do you get what I'm asking?
No, I very much understand what you're asking. I just have to think about how to answer the question.
Yeah, exactly. Don't want to set you up here.
So there are, yes, there are the road to becoming a star architect. There's a certain amount of determination that's involved or invested by the architect to become a star architect. They have a certain way of looking at things, and usually I'll never forget with now Pelly was a star architect, but he was a gentleman, a true gentleman, and if the problem could be presented to him, he was most willing to be helpful and solve the problem. But it was getting the information to him in a manner. We had talked about how you had to be timely. Well, the way a lot of architectural groups work, star architects work, is that they're trying to cover, they have to make payroll, and they've got a big staff and high rent to pay. They usually base themselves in, big metropolis, New York, London, and there's a certain amount of burden that they have to overcome every month. So getting that big of a team, a company that is broken into teams. For example, if they have 15 projects that are running through their office, they have to take their time. Now they're out selling the work, so half of their time is in marketing, just because the philanthropists and the decision makers that are buying their services want the star architect there. They want the face, they want the name, they want the prestige that comes with it. And that pulls away a lot of the working time that the actual architect has. So they're delegating it down to their team leaders, but they still have to make time to get together with the team leaders. So the way Caesar worked, which I think is fair to say a lot of architects work like this, the teams would go do their thing, and they would prepare a 2-hour presentation at 2 or 3 week intervals, where they would say, okay, here's the progress we made. Here are the last time we met, we were talking about the challenges on the exterior. We hear some details on the windows that we think are, here are 7 different scenarios. And they actually had full scale, I'm not full scale, but 16 scale, whatever it was of the building. And they would pull sections of the curtain wall out and then take another section, put it in, they'd sit back and they would talk about it. And it was tremendously laborious on how this process went. So when we needed to buy brick, for example, and there were 4 bricks that we were willing to accept as part of the design specs, or alternate, and that or alternate always came up as a problem, because somebody would submit a brick and you would think it was the same. It didn't matter. It had to go to the star architect for approval, and that meeting could be 4 weeks away. And they may be closing that production down and not running it again. So you're caught between a rock and a hard place. You can't get the information approved for 3 or 4 weeks, and you have a deadline that's going to expire in 2 weeks. So sometimes there were complications. Sometimes getting the information to the architect, the actual star architect, was difficult, because it goes through a filtering process, and sometimes that doesn't
hit the schedule
in the same way that you would like it to.
Right.
They have other projects that they're focusing on as well. So the reality is, unlike where we were construction managers on a particular project, focused on it, we're working on it, 50 hours a week, 60, 70. The architects are working on 3 or 4 projects, and they have to balance their time. If you talk to a contractor, it's always the architect's fault. Talk to the architect, it's always the contractor's fault. One of the things that I've spent my career doing is trying to get those 2 groups to understand that you guys are the right Twix and the left Twix. There is no candy bar unless you guys work together on this. And you're both very good people. You're both professionals. You both want to do a great job, but you don't know everything. And you need to listen to what the other person is saying and respect their professionalism as well. Some of the most successful projects are the ones where we had actual tradesmen that would come in and make the presentation, or listen to the presentation that the architects, the design team engineers were making, and then say, that's fantastic, but it isn't going to work that way. That's not how that's done in this city. We don't do a lot of that. We do it in masonry, for example, instead of concrete. So you can think that that's how it's going to happen. You could think that it's going to be steel, but actually it's going to be masonry and construction. So that tearing down those barriers and putting it back together in a different way, it was one of the keys for our it's a long walk to get a short way for your questions that you had, key learnings, but that one is. I'll never forget, we were trying to get a tractor trailer to be able to back into a loading dock on a particular project, and we took the engineers out and had cones set up. We used a big empty parking lot on a Sunday and took the biggest trailer that Broadway was likely to travel with. And, you have to maintain a certain pace when they're going to load a show in, and pull one out, because they don't get paid when they're not, no one's buying a ticket to watch them unload the show. So we took this driver, and he sat and watched us do this, and 4 hours in the morning, set all these cones up and everything. And then we went over and explained, and he kind of looked at us and he said, well, what are you all trying to get at? So we said, well, down in the city, there's an alley that we need you to get back. And, we don't know if a truck can make it. He said, well, why don't we just go down there? So the following Sunday at 4 a.m, we went down, and again, we were trying to explain to him and all this. He said, why don't you guys just get out of the way and let me put this trailer back there? And pulled up on the curb on one side, swung the tail around, and he skidded the truck and pushed it right in. And in 8 minutes, he had done what we had spent 8 months trying to figure out.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't matter if you're the star architect or you're the electrician doing the final punch out on the devices, every one of those is as important as the other.
It's a real integrated process in order to make a successful project. Yeah. I was watching a documentary a couple of years back now. It was talking about the Meyerson Symphony Center in Dallas. And Meyerson, he was telling the story about the architect Ian Pei, and I think it was Russ Johnson, I believe, the acoustician, but there was a conflict and they were going back and forth. The architect wanted one thing, the acoustician wanted another. And so he had to basically put his foot down, and like, both of you are getting kicked off this job if you don't get together and to make this happen. So I don't know if you had any of those instances where you had to sort of put your foot down on anybody to make the project move forward.
Oh, I'm a big teddy bear. I don't put my foot down.
Okay. So, last couple of questions here is, I know the reimagined David Geffen Hall, we're talking about Lincoln Center. Did you lead that effort as well too, didn't you? Or was it just...
In 2007, I went to Lincoln Center, which was a big institutional restoration project. The cultural aspect of it, we had Alice Tully Hall that we rebuilt. The Juilliard School had quite a few rooms that they built, revisioning of, doubling the size of their facility. But it wasn't it wasn't a big gem of a project. That didn't come out right. Lincoln Center was by far and away the largest cultural facility in the world, and one of the most prestigious. At that time, it had 12 resident companies, some of the biggest in the world. But this was a big institutional restoration. There was garage work, there was the fountain, there was all of the traffic work that had to go on. And you mentioned the 37 projects that were happening. Geffen was supposed to be the first project. At that time, it was Avery Fisher Hall, was supposed to be the first project that launched as far as the revisioning of Lincoln Center. And the Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic, and Lincoln Center Inc. is the landlord over the entire facility. So the Met, for example, has a 30-year, 40-year, 50-year, 100-year, whatever it is, ground lease for $1 on the building, and there was triple net, so they're responsible for everything that happens. But the building is actually owned by Lincoln Center and leased to the Metropolitan Opera. So each of those buildings, they have a different arrangement, but only the Juilliard owns their own facility. So they couldn't come to terms. The Philharmonic, in fact, the night that they thought that they were going to have a deal, they decided they were going to move back to Carnegie Hall, which couldn't have happened anyway. So that threw a wrench in those plans. Foster was the architect, Norm and his team, Spencer DeGray and Chris Connell. Great group of architects, had a wonderful design, but because the client couldn't get their house in order, the project got kicked and other things went first. It was going to be a revisioning of 65th Street. And from that 65th Street revisioning, then you brought in the groups that are to the south and a little bit more to the north, which is where the project ended up at $1.2 billion. So in 2007, April, I started Lincoln Center, and the agreement I had with the president at that time, Ren Levy, and Catherine Farley, who was the chairman of my board, Lincoln Center Development Project, was that I would do this on the condition that they would assure me that I would get an opportunity to renovate the world's greatest concert hall, or provide the world's greatest concert hall. Now, at that time, Avery Fisher Hall was not considered one of the great concert halls. In fact, it didn't even make the top 20, depending upon who, if you Baranek had a list that he always, it was kind of the U.S. News on colleges, kind of the top concert halls that were out there. And he was not a big fan of what happened at Philharmonic Hall. And then when Cyril Harris came in the 70s and did his work to try to improve it. And I think the adage is it was putting lipstick on a pig. It just didn't do what needed to be done. And to really fix the problem, which we studied for many years, you have to essentially tear the building down and start over again. So in 2012, we finished most of the work of the restructuring, renovation, and revisioning of the campus. But the thing that wasn't finished at that point was David Geffen Hall. So in I think around 2014 or 2015, we had a focused alignment between the goals, Lincoln Center's goals. Lincoln Center and the New York Philharmonic operate the building jointly, and that marriage helps both groups pay for the the facility's upkeep, the capital improvements, and the operational costs and so forth. So they were coming into alignment. Everyone was starting to be friendly again, and we went on a worldwide search for a new architect. And it's not that Foster did anything wrong; they had actually done a wonderful job. But with a new project comes new opportunity, and many years had gone by that time, and so there were different thoughts that were out, or different processes, procedures, and results that people were expecting in halls over that duration. It was about 8 years from the time Foster was put on hold until we picked it back up again. So we started with 150 architects that had experience in the form. Form is called concert, symphonic sound.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked internally with the consultants. First group we hired on that project was Fisher Dax. They acted as a guide to help us. The next group we hired, so Fisher Dax helped us hire the acoustician, who was acoustics, Paul Scarborough and his group. Then that group, those two teammates, helped us pick the architect. And we collectively, that team plus the others that were inside of our group, got down to 20, the top 20 firm, and that was our long short list. And that's when we started to involve the board. And the board was populated with a wealth of builders, big builders, developer types in New York City. So they had the chops when it came to understanding the reality of what the architects would bring and what we had to have to be able to sell philanthropically to get the money that we needed for the project. At that time, our budget was about $550 to $600 million. And three factors. One is thou shalt be the world's greatest concert hall, not one of the top five, the greatest concert. Second thing was you can't shut down any of the other things on the campus, and you had to be done in 26 months. So no matter how many ways we started to look at this, you could not do that building in 26 months. It was a 36-month project because we had to take the entire building down except for the structure that was standing and then rebuild it. And just the demolition alone would take a year's worth of time in building it back. With the care and custody that needed to make sure it was the world's greatest concert hall was a astronomical task. So one of the things that we decided internally, the team of decision makers, is that we had to have a architect without any ego, which is tantamount to building a building that would take 36 months to build in 26 months. It's not normal. Right. So the competition was strenuous and took a lot of effort. The team had a lot of commitment in travel. So we would go, Foster was one of the shortlisted firms. So we travel we did all of this in a week's time. So the rule was whoever went and met with an architect and gave them support during the competition. Let me back up. The competition we gave them was a 3-month journey, and they had to accomplish a certain set of criteria each time that over the course of the month. Each month they had homework that they had to do. And at the end, we were judging them on their ability to meet deadlines, their seriousness, and we gave them rules. You have to design a building that can't do this, can't do that, has to be this many square feet. Here's the program. But it was, as my son will say, it's the Kobayashi Maru, because it was an unsolvable problem. The program would not fit inside of the volume that we gave them. And we were watching to see how they would react to that. We knew that at some point they would all get to the same conclusion that this program won't fit in this volume. So what we were curious about is where were they going to violate either the program by cutting it or the volume by going beyond it. And how they handled it was important to us, because we wanted to know whether they were going to try to drive the project or they were actually listening to what the client needed to get done in 26 months. So the Diamond Smith Group out of Toronto did something that none of us expected. They went back to the old 1960 drawings they found in a museum for Avery Fisher, I believe. And they had noticed that in the excavation drawings, when the subway was built, there was fill that was under part of the building that actually could be used for programmable space that we didn't, in our 5 years of investigation into the project, had picked up on. So when they presented their project, the height restrictions and the perimeter that we gave them, the building, we had a full-scale model of the campus made, and you had to bring in, the architects had to bring in their model and set it down into the hole, and then judge it. And the others, when they put their buildings down, they either didn't fit because they were outside of the perimeter, or there was a part missing when we went through it. They didn't include the restaurant, for example, or they didn't include something else. So when Diamond Smith dropped their project or the building model into the overall landscape, it fit perfectly. And we said, okay, now let's go through and see where you missed the program. So we went through everything, and they had it all. We like, well, that's not possible. And they said, yep, but we're smarter than you, because this space, and we were able to put some of the storage and some of the other secondary, tertiary space down there. And it was a very elegant solution that, embarrassing to us, we didn't see. So they were the ones that were ultimately selected. Now that project ran forward. We under the advice of one of the board members, we also brought Thomas Heatherwick in to partner up with Diamond Smith, which was a kind of an unnatural relationship. And Thomas was the antithesis of what Diamond Smith. Diamond Smith was very keen on getting the 26 months in the budget met. And Thomas was more, it's an opportunity of a lifetime to do something for New York. And it's such an important role. We shouldn't be limiting ourselves, which was contrary to where we wanted to be, because we knew what the program had to be for this thing to be financially successful. All of that work had been done. We didn't need to revisit it. So over the course of the schematic design, there was a tension between the design influences that were at play and the clients. It acted as more of a wedge than it did as aloe to get the team together. So that in 2017, that went on hold, and the Philharmonic, Deborah Borda, was brought in as the new president. And Deborah had a different vision than the team at that time. So I went on to the shed at Hudson Yards, as you had mentioned. And then several years later, it picked up again. Peter Flam picked it up as the executive director with Tom Farrell, who was a principal at Tishman Speyer. Came in to help with that, and that team led the Turner, the architects. Diamond Smith was still there. Todd and Billy were brought in as a design influence. Todd Williams and Billy Chen instead of Thomas Heatherwick. So that team recently completed that building last year. It's I hear it's phenomenal. I haven't been inside of it yet. And at some point I will, but I do understand that from a acoustical perspective, it is just a wonderful, I don't know if it's the greatest concert hall in the world, but it's certainly one of the greatest concert halls in the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, thanks for sharing that. This has been a fascinating conversation and very informative to hear your story. Someone that's been in the business and leading in the business for so long. So I really appreciate all the information that you shared. One thing I think of is teamwork makes the dream work. That saying, as you speak about so many of the stories of these wonderful buildings being built. So I appreciate your time. And how can someone get in contact with you if they have one of these buildings to be built?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I've seen some of your podcasts before, and I enjoyed what we did in Panama City.
Right.
That's in Florida, not Panama City, Panama. I don't.
Panama, yes.
It's going to go, what? You guys are in Panama? As you'd mentioned, I'm a managing director with VVA in charge of the Cultural Entertainment Initiative. So it's R. Austin, AUSTIN, at VVA, Victor Alpha, LLC.com. And my cell number is on the LinkedIn, 614-425-2972.
Okay, I'll put all the information down so people can get in contact with you. And tell me when the book is coming out. With so many stories that you have, I know you have to be writing a book or something at some point.
That's funny because we are in the process of moving, as I had mentioned to you, and there are about 100 book boxes over there that have to be taken out and put on the shelves over there. But in it, there are 13 books that over the years, I have been writing down all of these little things, these little nuggets of knowledge about don't ever do this again. Make sure you do that.
Right.
And if anybody ever brings this up, throw them off the top of the building, kind of thing. But
yeah, exactly.
It is in my longhand chicken scratching, and some of it is legible, and some of it only my therapist could read. I think so.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see what.
Yeah. Well, when you get it done, I'll have to bring you back on the podcast so we can talk about it. All right.
Dakota, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. We'll talk with you later.
You bet. Bye now.
Bye.